All right, this is going to be something a little bit new for those of you who are unfamiliar with me and totally new here. My name's Owen Haft. I'm the founder and coach of After Hours Athletics. I also run fairly competitively myself, and so that's what this is going to be. It's going to be kind of a deep dive into my Houston half block from this last year. So kind of detailing training decisions, how I formulate a training plan, essentially going over some periodization stuff and kind of just giving you an all access look into what what it looks like from a coaching perspective. Obviously I'm the coach and the athlete in this situation, but what it looks like creating a plan for someone to be really good on a specific day. So let's start with this kind of just overview of my plan here. So in this block, I had 3 races, kind of 3 different priority levels you can see here. An 8K race in Philly, club cross country, which was 10 kilometers, and then Houston half. And then we can kind of go over here and you can see week by week volume goals, emphasis in terms of intensities, and then just kind of what phase of the block we're at. So kind of the supportive phase, and then as we move into the specific phase. I think it's important also to give you a little context of what was going on before this. So I was not, coming from nothing. I had this kind of pretty consistent summer and early fall block that wasn't really too specific training for anything, but I raced like the Brooklyn Mile, which was actually pretty decent. And then I raced the Twin Cities 10 mile, and I think I ran 49:20 there. And so this was my first real crack at a longer race. I was more of a miler and a 5K guy in college, so these longer races have taken a lot of work to start to come back to me. I think the endurance piece has been something that I've always struggled with. I was always decent but not great in cross country in college, and so this is a lot of new stuff, is this kind of extension work. And I would say I always trained with pretty high volume. Like I was running around 90 miles a week in college as a miler, but that was more of how I trained, and my racing skill set was definitely a little bit more suited towards 1500 5K. So yeah, that's a little background, and I kind of want to go through a week by week breakdown of this block. So if we start here, I think this block really, I guess, kind of officially started in late October. This gives me, how many weeks that is? Probably 14 weeks to kind of specifically prep for this race. And again, I think I wasn't coming into this completely either rested or completely fried. So I was in a relatively decent fitness coming off that Twin Cities 10 mile. And then I took a really big kind of down week after that, and then got back into some training. So starting in early October, mid-October, I went straight into this kind of supportive phase. I'm going to kind of gloss over these first few weeks. These were also, I work in running in New York, and these are New York City Marathon weeks. So these weeks were chaos. I actually don't even know. We can probably click over here and see what those weeks were volume-wise. Those were my kind of targets. Yeah, so they were pretty good, actually. You can see this week right here was 102 miles. So yeah, I kind of was running a lot of volume, but not a ton of intensity. You can see some pretty good sessions here, actually. 10 by mile, that's quite a long one, and some 400s and some 3Ks. So again, I wasn't coming into this with no fitness, but I really kind of wanted to get a good periodize out specific block for this half, so I could give myself the best shot at a good crack. One thing to also frame this block is one of my favorite graphs in the game, the funnel periodization graph. This is a Canova creation. and basically just is how I think about periodization for anything. And I think in the traditional coaching world, we come from this very block periodization idea where you do all your easy miles, then you do all your tempo work and all your threshold stuff, and then you do all your VO2 stuff to quote unquote sharpen up for whatever race you're going to do. And that's not really how I do things, how I've seen the best coaches in the world do things. It's a little bit more, you're always hitting all these intensities all the time. You're just shifting kind of this emphasis. And then you're using this general to specific framework for everything. So you can see here, we have the specific intensity, which, it could be it's whatever your race distance is. So if you're racing a mile, the specific work is mile specific work. If you're racing a marathon, specific work is marathon effort. So for me, the specificity is half marathon effort, which is right about that LT2 world. And I'll probably get a little bit into how I kind of a glossary of how I describe training intensities in a second too, because I think that'll just be important to establish. Everyone loves calling the same thing something different in the coaching world, so we'll get clear there. But essentially, you can see here, you have your general endurance, which I think people understand is easy runs, slow jogging, but you also have your general speed, which is actually sprinting. And so, you kind of have to work both sides of this coin to get to your specific work. So let's just take this general endurance build and progression periodization from kind of this base phase to the competition phase. So your base phase is going to be your easy miles, and then this graph has kind of shifted down because the half marathon is pretty endurance focused. So you're not going to progress as much with as much magnitude with your endurance work, but you go from your easy miles to maybe your kind of that moderate intensity to your LT1 and then to your LT2. So you can kind of see how these intensities are increasing step by step, and each intensity supports the next step. So if you go, we're going from easy to LT2, and again, LT2 is kind of this specific intensity for half marathon prep. So that's kind of the end point. We want to get really good at running LT2. But you have to build that with these kind of building blocks. So the easy miles support that moderate work, and that moderate work supports that LT1 work, and that LT1 work supports the LT2 work, which is your most specific work. Flip over to the other side, and if we start at that, that initial side is kind of the endurance side, and then if we flip to the speed side, you go from your most general speed, which is your sprinting, and then you kind of work that down. I kind of describe it by race distance. So from sprinting to 800 meter speed to mile speed to 3K speed to 5K speed to 10K speed, ending right at that half marathon intensity, essentially. So I think people a lot of times forget about this speed progression and periodization, and just think about kind of the traditional easy to threshold periodization that you're going to get on the endurance side. But it's important to remember that speed side, because a lot of those adaptations are really important for performance. And you want to have your VO2 high enough to where you can run a higher percentage of that VO2 for your threshold work, which again is kind of our specific work for the half marathon. And you want to be able to sprint pretty well, because you want to be really efficient and be really mechanical with your strides, so you can do more volume on a chassis that is moving efficiently. So it's all these little complexities that inform this kind of overview of how you're piecing together a plan. And so it's really important to kind of understand, both of those sides of the coin. So let's move on from funnel periodization as much as I love it. You can kind of see the last piece here is kind of this volume piece, which, you know, in a base phase, you're going to kind of build that volume. You're going to have your highest volume kind of in that pre-competition phase, and then tailor off as your specific works becomes a little bit more important, and the overall volume becomes less important. And you can actually see that pretty apparent on here. If you look at these weekly volumes on my Strava, you can see that the block essentially starts right around here in November, and then there's a couple of races, so you get kind of these down weeks, and then right in here you get kind of this highest volume couple of weeks, maybe this week and then these couple of weeks. But then as you get closer to the race, the specificity becomes the more important thing. So you have to allow, you kind of have to shift your emphasis towards the quality work and away from the volume to allow for that quality work to be quality enough. So you can see this kind of gradual tailor off of overall volume there leading into the race. So yeah, let's pop over here and just look through some of this stuff. So essentially these are the training intensities in which are emphasized in all of these given weeks. So if we're going from that funnel periodization, if we start looking at these early blocks, we're doing a lot of economy work, which I would say is more along the lines of like you're running mile effort, you're running 3K effort, you're running 800-meter effort. So you are pretty high up on the speed side of that periodization. And then you're kind of pairing that with LT1. So you are pretty far from specific. Again, we're not in the specific phase yet. We're in this kind of supportive phase where we are touching on all these intensities that we're going to build upon as we get more specific. But yeah, you can kind of see these couple weeks are economy and LT1. So some of those workouts were 400s at 3K effort down to mile effort, or hills kind of in that same range. And then other workouts were, that 10 by mile you saw, and maybe some very kind of steady running. And as we kind of shift into here, we hit, you can see a shift between these weeks and these weeks from that economy work to VO2 work. So we're coming down that funnel on the speed side of specificity, and we are shifting to an intensity and a focus that's a little bit closer to our target intensity, which is half marathon effort. So we'll see, some VO2 work, and also for the way this block was set up, I had an 8K here and a 10K here, and so this VO2 work was a little bit more supportive or specific for those races, which also went really well with the general orientation of the block, where kind of the first half of these 14 weeks were really meant to work on building some of that endurance side. So a lot of LT1 work, a lot of volume, but also raising the roof of my VO2. And so doing economy work and VO2 work in the races, of course, are really good stimuli for that as well. That is going to essentially raise this roof of my VO2 max, which then you can kind of go back and fill in that gap with your threshold work. So by raising that roof, you're able to run LT2 at a higher percentage of your VO2 max, which if you do the kind of prerequisite LT2, LT1 work. So that's kind of like how I like to go about a lot of marathon blocks too for athletes. Is maybe we pair a marathon block with a kind of mini VO2 block or speed block coming into it, because when you're marathon training, you're not really focused on these VO2 adaptations, but it's also important to raise that ceiling. So if you can kind of do some of that work, really focus on raising that roof, then you can kind of go back and fill in the gaps. Versus when you go the other way, when you try to just push that VO2 up by doing more threshold work and coming at it from that angle, you only have you don't have very many places to go. So yeah, that's kind of the theme of this block. Was the first half is going to be a little bit more VO2 heavy, raising that roof, especially with the races paired in here, and then we'll get super specific in kind of that second half. So you can kind of see here, as we progress into the second half, you see a little bit less VO2, you see a little bit more LT2, as well as that LT1 intensity. For me, coming from the speed side of things as an athlete, VO2 is never, for a half marathon, it's a little bit less important for me because I kind of have those natural abilities. And so for me, it was more of a focus on extending my LT1 and LT2 work and building fatigue resistance, doing long runs with intensity in them, and really focusing on this endurance side, because given the context of my entire training history, that is not an area that I've focused on too much. So you can kind of see right here, this middle block, which is really the meat of this specific block, was a lot of LT1, LT2. You know, of course, we're throwing a little VO2 in there to kind of maintain some of those adaptations. You know, to maintain an adaptation, usually it takes about a third of the work that it did to build the adaptation. So you don't want to completely step away from anything, but you just want to shift that emphasis. And then you can see, you know, Club Cross, which was a 10K. The context of the race, it actually ended up being, you know, kind of the perfect stimulus. It was super muddy and just grindy, and shifted a little bit more even towards kind of half marathon intensity, I would say. But yeah, that's kind of the overview of this block, and then we kind of get down into the taper, obviously. And since I am a more fast twitch inclined athlete when it comes to the half marathon, I used some VO2 stuff in the last couple of weeks just to play to my strengths. You know, this was kind of a 5-week stint of working on my weaknesses, but then I kind of wanted to come back to some of my strengths, you know, right at the end there. I just feel better when I'm doing some of that stuff. So that's a little bit of the overall context. And yeah, now we'll head into kind of each of these weeks, and I'll give you a little bit of an idea of, you know, kind of what some of these look like. So again, the start of these blocks were very, again, we're not coming into this with nothing, but with no fitness. So we were at a point where we were ready to train, and you can see that from right away. These first couple of weeks are very VO2 and LT1 heavy. So you can see this is just a pure LT1 day, double workout day, where in the morning, 12 by kilometer, 307 down to 301, and then in the afternoon, just a 5-mile steady run. So this is probably, if I was doing things totally optimally, I probably would have flipped these. So had the steady run in the morning just to make sure that lactate was super low in the morning and I was really able to recover. But just the way this day worked out, I remember there were people doing those workouts in the afternoons and in the morning. So I wanted to do the workouts with people, and was just going to be controlled on that morning session. Double workouts, you know, probably warrant an entire extra video, but I think they're a really good tool to build threshold volume. And I just think for a half marathon, they're not, you know, they're getting your legs that specific work, but you are not running hard on tired legs, which a lot of the half marathon is. So I use it as a tool. I did a little bit more of it in kind of the previous 8 weeks prior to this build. But yeah, I think it's just important to remember that it's a tool and it's not a fix-all. You know, I think it's actually a little bit more applicable to athletes that are racing on the track as opposed to on the roads, where fatigue resistance is such an important thing. So yeah, had that double day, had this day where you start out with some threshold maintenance here, 4 by 1200, and then did a couple sets of 600 breakdowns, 6422, kind of at that 5K down to mile intensity, maybe even a little faster. And then finish just with a flush out 1200 at LT1. I think this is something that I use this a lot after intense workouts. Stuff that is harder than threshold is to just include a really easy flush threshold rep, whether it's even 800 meters or if it's a mile or even up to 2 miles. One, you're building on that ability to recycle lactate and to use that as fuel, but you're also just getting this extra stimulus of running kind of hard on tired fibers. So these fibers are all exhausted from your, in this case, the 600 breakdown, and doing just even 1,200 meters on tired fibers, you almost get like double points because you're doing something on tired legs. So obviously it's not how it works. I wish it was, but yeah, that's the rationale here. You'll see it in a lot of these workouts. And then just finish this up with a long run with some steady. So 10 miles at 5:34 in there, just kind of massaging that low aerobic zone. Next week, intensity is basically the same. So it's this VO2 LT1 kind of world. You can see this was kind of a threshold LT1 to LT2 builds in terms of these 3 mile reps. So it's 2 sets of 3 miles where you build each mile. So for this one, we went 5:12, 5:02, 4:47. So you're starting at probably LT1, you're ending probably about LT2, maybe a little quicker. This was in Prospect Park, so it's pretty hilly, so it's a little bit hard to, control some of these paces. But like I remember this 4:47 was on a pretty big downhill, so it's more about the effort than the paces. And then we just finished up with some 400s that are kind of that VO2 intensity. So it's kind of the VO2 day, and then this week, this workout was on a cross country course, kind of getting some prep for that cross country race in a couple weeks, but just a simple fartlek, minute on, minute off, ons at LT2 to 8K and offs, kind of easy to moderate. So difference between these 2 weeks is I would say this initial week was a little more polarized with a lot of LT1, and this second week was a little bit more in the middle with kind of that blendy stuff where you're doing, some LT2, some VO2, some kind of even like, with this fartlek kind of 10K intensity. So a little bit more blendy of a week, but I think it's also good to really alternate those. You don't want to get stuck into just doing the same thing over and over again. So this was kind of a week leading into this 8K, which again was not very important. And so this week you can see like I ended up at 103 miles and I ended up at 100 miles on this other week, which were frankly a lot more than I thought I was going to. But I felt good, and I knew that kind of volume was going to be an emphasis here. So it was flowing. It's probably why I felt really bad in this 8K, which I'll get to in a second. But I was in Colorado this week, and this was kind of my week, and that's a lot of intensity and a lot of volume for a week where you're traveling, nonetheless traveling at altitude without any adaptations to it. So this week was more just about the race. So we got kind of this alternation style workout in here, and alternations are something I use quite a bit, which are essentially, you're alternating between an intensity below threshold and above threshold. And the reps above threshold really spike the lactate, and the reps below threshold use that lactate and recycle it, throw it through the lactate shuttle, and get you apt at using that as fuel, which I think a lot of people forget. It's kind of that's textbook Canova stuff, which I've read a ton about, had a lot of success with it with athletes and for myself. So this was just some mile reps at threshold with some 200s split in there. So pretty simple, kind of just gearing up for this 8K. This 8K felt really bad, but ran 24:18, which was not good for where I'm at. But this race was more about just getting that good hard 8K intensity in. Paired that with just an easy long run that kind of ended up being a little bit steadier the day after, but felt fine. So that's kind of the first little mini block. If we go back to this kind of outline, that's kind of wraps up this support phase. Was ending with that 8K, and now we get really into some specific stuff, which is the fun part. That's kind of the meat of the block. And let's take a look at how some of this went. So coming off this 8K, especially paired it with that long run that ended up being a little harder, I wanted to take the start of this week really easy. I was also traveling for Thanksgiving and had this kind of big half marathon specific workout this week. So this week ended up being pretty not super intense. I just kind of had this one workout and then a longer long run. But with the travel coming off the race, I wanted to err on the side of caution. So we just had this first specific workout. And again, this is stuff that we have built through, all of these threshold workouts. You can see essentially this specific workout was 8 miles of work. And we've kind of built to that. This is 6 miles of work. This is, 7 in the morning, 5 in the afternoon. Obviously, that ends up being a lot. And so we're building to the point where we can do, for half marathon, for a good athlete, I always want to try to get to 8 to 10 miles of half marathon specific work in a session as kind of the goal. When you're getting towards a half marathon, you're starting to get to the point where you can't do 13 miles of intensity, half marathon intensity, and recover from that and expect that to kind of prepare you for the race. It's going to be too hard. And so you're kind of preparing your body to do it on the day. It's more clear when you look at like the marathon. You can't go run 26 miles at marathon pace, even if you break it up. It's way too much stimulus for your body. So the marathon, you're really preparing yourself to do it on the day. A lot of times you're only doing, even 14, 12, sometimes 16 miles of marathon intensity in a workout as kind of your last big session leading into a marathon. Versus when you look on the other side of the coin and you look at 5K or 10K or mile stuff on the track, you're pretty much always doing 5K worth of 5K intensity when you're prepping for a 5K. So half marathon, our target was 8 to 10 miles of half marathon work within one session. So you can kind of see this first one, 4x2 mile, starting quite a bit easier than half marathon intensity and working down to just a little bit over. So we had 2 minutes plus 30 seconds per rep, more, starting at 5:15 pace and working down to 4:48 pace, 4:46 pace for this last rep, and then just paired that with a 20-mile easy long run. Again, travel week, kind of get in the most important thing, which was a specific thing, and get out healthy. And as we build on this, you'll see a lot more of these half marathon specific sessions. So essentially we had 5. They were kind of all very sequential. And then, so that was kind of one emphasis of the specific block, is building volume of that specific work. And then pairing it with some of that alternations work, because, a half marathon, you're so close to that LT2 line that you want to be able to, you're definitely producing a good bit of lactate. Your body's clearing it, but you want to just really improve your body's ability to clear that lactate. So because of that, we're doing a lot of this alternation work. You can see here, and some races, I'd say this cross-country race is basically alternations work, as well as kind of building fatigue resistance. So those 3 things are the focus of this specific block: fatigue resistance, volume at half marathon pace, and some alternation stuff, working on that lactate shuttle. So you can see this kind of a classic alternation session. This was really big volume. Each of these sets is 1.5 miles. So this ends up being, I think it was maybe 7 miles, 6.5 miles of solid work with basically 800 at 5K. And then you flush it out with a 5-minute mile, so threshold mile. Short rests in between those reps to really work on, you got to start that mile while your lactate's high from that 800, and then you kind of get the reset of that 3-minute jog. This was kind of just an LT1 maintenance session. Again, just throwing in some of these, especially after an intenser session, is really important. So 6x2K, very standard. Go down here. This is kind of the week of this club cross country race. So this was more of just a, again, kind of a tune-up session, but also hitting a little bit higher intensities with basically just 3 by 1K at easy threshold, then 3K is kind of maybe 10K effort, 5K effort, 3K effort. This probably actually ended up being 10K effort, 10K effort, 3K effort. I remember this 240 being fairly hard, and then just some 200s to blow it out. Whatever rest. Then got to club cross country. Ran just a super muddy, gross, slow classic cross country race, which was super fun. 32:49 is certainly nowhere near what I could run for a 10K. It's probably 3 minutes or more slower, but on that course, that was the day. Placed 34th, which was pretty solid, around some pretty solid guys that are probably in the 63 to 64 minute half marathon range. So this was a good kind of fitness check. And yeah, came out of that healthy and enjoying it. So just had this day off, I remember, and so we kind of got right back into some training. So missed a long run that week, but totally fine. With this first session after a race, so with a Saturday race, kind of that next Tuesday session, I always err on the side of going to aerobic. I never want to jump into something very intense. And I always like going something that is pretty ambiguous. And a session that I love is, this was a 9-mile tempo. Just basically starting moderate, maybe LT1, kind of that 540 range, and saying I'm going to start easy and kind of hard, and kind of letting my legs decide where that line is for the day. So this was just 9 miles, 540 down to 505. Again, with the focus not being on the numbers and more just on the feeling. Pretty simple day. Then we get into this, this is kind of really crunch time of this block, these 3 weeks here. Because the last couple of your weeks, you're kind of just, getting the body feeling good. And I hate the term sharpening. You're not sharpening. You're getting very specific, and you're just tapering. So this is kind of the 3 weeks that we have to do some serious work. So you can see the volume is quite high for these weeks, in that 90 to 100 range. And we start building these half marathon specific workouts every week. So you can see this one, 8 by mile, starting at about half marathon intensity and working a little bit faster than it. So you can see we got down to 440 here. We were taking 60 plus 5 seconds each rest. So I think we maybe ended at about 90 seconds rest. And, this workout was slightly influenced by some uphill reps, some downhill reps, some windy reps. So these splits are a little bit all over the place, but you can see just kind of that general trend of getting faster. So this is 8 miles of work, just a scotch above or more intense than half marathon effort. Pair that with standard, good, solid long run. Then coming into this next week, again, this was a travel week for Christmas. So it got kind of messed up, but again, wanted to kind of keep the main thing, which was this half marathon specific workout, and then a little bit of a fatigue resistance workout. So I just had a easy 14 miles on this day here, instead of trying to squeeze in one more session. So this was back in Minnesota on a snowy trail, and so there's no point into trying to do something intense that day. And then this is kind of the next step in that half marathon specific build. So we went from 4 by 2 miles at maybe a little bit slower than half marathon effort to 8 by mile, a little bit faster than half marathon effort. Come back here with 3 by 3 miles at essentially right about half marathon effort. This was in probably 5 degrees in Minneapolis. And so it was, these paces are more the effort that I was looking for, as opposed to, half marathon pace, which is probably a little bit faster, in that 4:53 range. But yeah, 9 miles of specific work, 3 minutes rest. These reps are pretty hard, but this is just building that specificity. You got to get your body ready to do what you want it to do. And so that was a good one. and then paired it with this 20-mile long run, but in the second half, just doing some LT1 reps. So you're running hard on these tired legs, which is for me, especially coming from the speed side, is a huge thing for these longer races. And so, yeah, this, I think with these types of workouts, it's important to not overrun them. Just doing some of this intenser work in the back half of long run, kind of similar to what I was talking about before, but you're running on fatigued fibers, so they don't need a huge signal and a huge stimulus to get the adaptation that you want. And the flip side of the coin, and if you were to overrun these things, is it's just super inflammatory and it's super risky in terms of injury risk. So, running these on feel, and not feeling the need to press too much, especially given it's a 20-mile or it's a couple days after a big session. You just kind of have to get that work in. So this ended up being 40 minutes of LT1 work, which is pretty good in the midst of a 20-miler. Pop down to this next week and see the volume comes down a little bit just to ensure that these workouts were good, because this is kind of my last week to get some really good adaptation. So this was a VO2 plus kind of fatigue resistance. It's almost takes some of those alternation principles with this 2-mile flush at the end, but some 800s. I remember I felt really bad this day, so this was probably about 5K effort, that kind of 219 world. So spiking the lactate pretty good, and then pairing it with this 2-mile flush at the end. So building some fatigue resistance, recycling that lactate, and working a little bit on that VO2 kind of 10K race intensity. So you're getting, if you remember the funnel, that 10K intensity, you're getting pretty close to, that's the most specific work. And then this is kind of the big one. This is honestly probably the biggest, most specific workout of the training block. This is about 3 weeks out. I attempted one more, but I'll get to it. It didn't go well. So this ended up being kind of the last big workout. 6 miles at half marathon effort with some rest, and then just some 400s at pretty much the same effort. So it ended up being, 7.5 miles at about half marathon effort, but with 6 of those being with no rest. So these 400s, 68 to 69 is about LT2 effort when you're only running 400. I think it's important to remember that threshold effort is an effort and it's not a pace. So it really depends on the state of your legs from the training week, from even that workout, and then also just the distance of the reps. So you could run 200s until the sun comes up and run them pretty fast, but not that fast, and kind of stay, your lactate could stay very steady. And you can do the same thing for 2-mile reps, but those are also the speeds at which you're doing those workouts where you're maintaining a lactate level are extremely different. So for me, these 68s and 69s were about, it felt like the same effort as this 6 miles, even though this is 432 pace and this is 457 pace. If I were to prick lactate, they would probably be about the same. And then paired this with a kind of steady progression long run. I would have liked to do this a day after, but I'm not a professional, and life things are in the way all the time. So this is just move it up, and wherever you kind of chunk the stress, you just have to chunk the rest on the back end. So had these back to back, which is a huge stimulus, 2 days, and just had to follow that up with a couple of days of really easy jogging. Yeah, into the last little bit here of the block. This is 2 weeks out. I guess this session was actually 2.5 weeks out, not 3 weeks out. So pretty close. This is the week before, so really your last week to do anything in terms of fitness gains. And you can see again here the volume's dropping. We were at about 100, then down to 90, then down to 75, then down to 65 for race week. So this was my attempt at a last big session. I was trying to do 4 miles, 3 miles, 2 miles, which would be 8 miles or 9 miles total at half marathon effort, but I was on the treadmill and just, I'm sure anyone who's run on treadmills before can attest. Sometimes you just feel terrible. Other times you feel amazing. I caught a terrible day, so turned this into 3 miles and 3 by mile at about 5:10. And I remember it being way harder than half marathon effort. So I was a little concerned after this, but it's also important to not put so much stock into these specific days. You can be specific with your plan, but the highest predictor for success is going to be the overall body of work. So it's never it's never about one day. It's never even about a week. It's always about the entire body. So this went bad. It still got in, a decent amount of running at a solid effort, and kind of cut my losses that day. And then came right back with this workout. This workout felt great. This is back outside, essentially 2 miles, and then kind of this big 2K cut down where I'm going from LT2 effort and shading that down with each rep onto mile effort. So you can see this 6:03 2K is about LT2, maybe a scotch faster, maybe 10K. Then you get to this mile, which is probably about 10K, 8K effort. Then you get to this 1200 in that 5K world, 800 in that 5K to 3K world, and you're just cutting this down. So this was a way of kind of hitting a lot of these intensities as kind of a maintenance thing to maintain some of that adaptation, and then pairing it with 3 total miles of threshold work. So again, this mile flush at the end, take some of those alternation principles of just working on that lactate shuttle and building some fatigue resistance. And so I like a lot of workouts for a lot of my athletes will do some threshold, something more intense, and then some threshold on the end. It's kind of a classic sandwich. Then right here, easy, medium, long run. Tune-up workout leading into the race. Really just doing what I had been doing, just with less volume. So some threshold miles, and then just some 400s because I am a kind of speed inclined athlete, just to feel good, play to my strengths a little bit. Again, those 400s are threshold intensity, but the speed is a little bit faster. And then I like doing a pre-race for these longer races 2 days before, where I just do 3 miles at a very easy, steady rhythm. So 3 miles at 5:30, and then some strides then, instead of doing, the strides the day before. I think for faster races, it's important to do strides the day before. You need your nervous system a little bit more primed because your speed is higher. So you need to be a little bit more mechanical and mechanically efficient. But for a half marathon, especially coming from the speed side, I was confident I could run 4:55 pace without having too much stress on my mechanics. And then, led into the half. Ended up running 65 flat. Learned a lot about executing a half in this race, but it was super windy, and so you kind of got forced into these groups. And I probably picked one group too easy, but I also was going into this being my first half, wanting to err on the side of caution, and to a point where I could be competitive the last 5K, which I definitely was. Kind of won my group. Probably left a little bit of time out there, but who knows? Maybe if I would have gone faster, I would have blown up. So yeah, I was really happy with that, and really happy with kind of this whole block that we had. Using a lot of the principles that I use for all my athletes, and really, just laying something out that is kind of rooted in this funnel periodization. As well as kind of taking together the context of an athlete and using those to dial in some specifics to essentially get really good on a day. So that's going to be it. Thanks if you made it to the end here. Thank you. Shoot me any questions. I love chatting about this stuff. I thought this was going to be probably a 15-minute video, and who knows how long I've been talking at this point. So appreciate you watching. If you like this sort of stuff, let me know. I certainly love doing kind of these training analysis deep dives. even onto other athletes, and seeing how other coaches are thinking and how a lot of these principles are coming to life. So appreciate it. Maybe I'll see you in the next one.